Knowing exactly what you're going to teach every single day during the week can be challenging in ELA. There's so many different components that we have to worry about. We have grammar, we have word study, we have vocabulary, we have writing, we have reading, and it can be overwhelming. So I'm going to bring you guys along with me this week. I'm going to show you the bridging literacy method and exactly what my lessons plans look like every single day. So we're going to prep them each morning, and then I'm going to walk you through exactly how they went. So come on and join me this week as I share a week's worth of lesson plans. So what is the bridging literacy method? This method is something that I've created to really help me in providing authentic instruction that really connects between reading and writing. There's no more separate lessons that don't make sense for how they all kind of mix together. Everything is very strategic. And so we have this bridging literacy method broken down into 6 units for 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. Eventually, we're gonna have 3rd grade, which will be very exciting. And currently, my students in the classroom, both 5th and 6th grade, are working within the creative narrative unit. This is where we create an imaginative story, but we have a focus, and our focus is going to be all around characters. And so in reading, we're digging deep into characters, understanding how they work within our stories, so that when we go back into our writing, we can implement those strategies into our writing. So I wanted to share with you guys a little bit about what we have this morning. So at the start of every lesson, there are 4 lessons within this unit, and each lesson has 5 parts to it. So at the beginning of the week, I can start a brand new lesson, and I'm just starting one today. And this lesson is all about engaging with our mentor text, understanding and comprehending what's happening, asking and answering questions, and really working in depth with vocabulary and context clues. So for my 5th graders, they're going to be reading The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, and then for my 6th graders, we're going to read The Good Deed. So I have their text already picked out. We have also the vocabulary words that are picked out, and students are going to get to read it. We're going to have a really thorough discussion of what's happening within this story, and then they're going to get to practice with their vocabulary words and pulling out those context clues. Now, this may look a little bit different every single week because I don't want to have the exact same thing over and over and over again, but the concepts are still the same. So this week, 5th grade and I are going to be reading this text together, and I actually have it on my Kindle, so I'm going to be displaying that here on my TV in the back. So my students are actually going to be seated around here. We'll end up moving this just because desks that's kind of what we're dealing with. But we're going to read this text together. We're going to engage in some asking and answering questions, and then students are going to get an opportunity to practice with these vocabulary words. Now, to show and model this for my students, I did print out their graphic organizer that they are working with. I'm going to put this all together, and I'm going to model with this anchor chart, which will be placed right here. So that's what 5th grade is going to be working on this morning. And then 6th grade is going to work on The Good Deed. Now, they're actually going to get to read this with partners. I'm not going to read this with them today. I want to see what they're capable of. And so they have a discussion question at the end of this to get them to see if they've comprehended the story overall. But we still do have vocabulary words. We're going to talk about one of them together, which is going to be deed, because it goes along with The Good Deed. And then they have 3 that they're going to work on independently with. Now, what's really nice is that this crew right here, I've actually had them since last year. So they're very, very aware of how I kind of run my classroom. And so for me, allowing them to do this with a partner, it just works because I know that they're capable of doing that. So to give you guys a frame of reference, I have about an hour of ELA time. Now, within that hour of ELA time, I have students who are being pulled. So really, when you're thinking about it, I have about 30 minutes of just really good core instruction. And then those students are pulled out of my classroom and they're given some remediations. And then I have only some of my students. So I really have to make sure that my lessons are short, sweet, simple, and to the point. And that's why this bridging literacy method has worked so well for me because I know today our focus is going to be on just understanding, comprehending a text, citing evidence, using all of those pieces that we've been talking about since the beginning of the year, and then also going in depth with vocabulary. So that is going to be my lesson for today. I'm going to share with you guys a little bit later on how everything went and give you some example of some graphic organizers that were completed. So be thinking about it. What does this word sulked mean? He sulked beneath a tree. For weeks, he sulked under the mango trees until he remembered the library down the road. You gotta think about it. He sulked beneath the tree. Think about what's happening, the context of the story. Yes. Yes. Very nice. I want you to turn to the people next to you and I want y'all just to have a conversation. So if you can just turn to somebody next to you and have a conversation about what that means. Do you see the power of understanding your synonyms and antonyms, that when you look it up online, and you're allowed to look it up online, that it helps you just understand this word overall? So if you were to do this and your synonyms and antonyms aren't making sense to what you wrote, should you maybe relook at it? Mm-hmm. Absolutely, right? Okay, close up your iPads. Thank you. A windmill. So at this point, his dad has said, you can't go to school, right? He is what? He's sulking under a tree. He's super depressed because he can't go to school. But then he remembers, oh wait, there were some Americans who came and they set up a library. So what did he choose to do? He went and started reading to learn for himself. What kind of a person does that make him? What kind of a person do you think? Both of my blocks went really well. During my first block, we were reading The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. The kids really enjoyed that story overall. We ended up adding our vocabulary to the vocabulary wall. I know it's a little bit crooked. I'm gonna fix it in just a moment. And then we also had a little video clip where the students got to learn a little bit more about William himself from his own voice. So I'm going to turn you guys around so you can see a little bit of what my Schoology page looks like. So I have to be a little bit strategic whenever I'm showing this to you because I cannot show you all of the different parts because it's classified information with students. But you can see here that I have them broken down by my unit. And so we're working within the creative narrative unit. We're in lesson 2, and then we have 5 parts. So all of these parts is going to be what we will be learning this week. And this week was all about the introduction. So here, students had the book that they can go back and listen to just in case they were absent. So I tried to post those whenever they're available. And then we got to learn a little bit more about William himself through this little video. And then students have their vocabulary that they submit to me here. We also did some practicing and I did modeling with the word sulked. So we looked at the word sulked and we talk about how we can pull context clues from the text and then how do we support that by explaining how this context clue helps us understand depressed. The other thing that we do is I will have my students look up synonyms and antonyms. Now I have them use a thesaurus online, and the reason I have them do that is because I want them to look for words that they understand that they can then make connections to help them comprehend that word a little bit better. So we have our synonyms here, and then we also have our antonyms. And they did a really good job overall. From there, I also talked them through their second 2 words that they had. So I had them infer, and then I had them write the meaning. We discussed it a little bit, and then we kind of continued reading the rest of the story and then watching that second video. So they did a very good job. My second block, which is my 6th grade block, they were reading The Good Deed. And so they worked with groups and they didn't quite get it done, but we have some extra time in the morning tomorrow that my students are gonna get to finish their reading with their vocabulary words and also their discussion. But before we started, we talked about each of the different words. And then I also had them read the discussion post that I wanted them to focus on. This helps to define the purpose of their reading for that day. So every student understood the purpose of what they were going to be doing, and then they were able to then kind of locate that as they were reading. So what I did is I printed out the text a little bit earlier this morning And then I started kind of finding points for us to be able to discuss tomorrow before we get into our actual lesson. So here you can see there's the printout. Basically, I go through and I find some spots here where I can ask questions, either why, or I underline areas that will really kind of pinpoint what, how it describes that particular character itself. So I went and did that. This I'm gonna end up keeping so I don't have to redo this because I didn't teach 6th grade last year. I didn't have any of my materials ready, but now that I have this done, I'm not going to get rid of it. So what I end up doing is I have a file cabinet back here, and I have it grouped in a way that these red right here are the first unit. The blue is the second unit. So I have 5th grade in the front, so you can see like 5th grade unit 2, lesson 2, but then I have 6th grade here. So this is 6th grade lesson 2, and I'm just gonna put all of the materials that I ever need inside of that lesson 2 so that I have it ready to go for the next year's. But there it is. Lots of really good discussion today. The kids did a great job working collaboratively. So I'm gonna kind of wrap up for today, and then I'll show you guys what we are doing tomorrow morning. So welcome to Tuesday. This is going to be the second part to our lesson for this week. Now, part 1, as a reminder, was all about just engaging students in their mentor text. Today, we're going to start digging a little bit deeper into our mentor text, and we're going to start applying different skills or strategies to that. And these are going to be specific reading skills or strategies. So for my 5th graders, they're going to be focusing a lot on extrinsic and intrinsic characteristics. So I have an activity for them that they're going to end up doing. For my 6th grade class, they are also going to be looking at characters, but they're going to look at character change and the events. So I'm going to show you some of the things that I've prepped for today's lessons. So again, I've already printed out my materials for today. Again, I'm going back to taking my graphic organizer and printing it into a poster size, so that kind of gives you a reference. This is 4 sheets of paper that it will print out on. And I'm going to just end up taping it together just like I did the one from yesterday. So you can see here that there was a little bit of tape there. So this is going to be their extrinsic, intrinsic characteristics. The focus is that I will start by having a conversation about feelings versus traits, which my students have had this experience with their teacher last year. So we're going to do a quick little activity here that I have prepped and ready to go, and it's a feelings versus traits sort. So I already have these cut up and they're ready to go inside of the envelopes, and then I have my key here. So I'll put students inside of groups, and then they're going to work to sort out feelings versus traits so that we can have that just as a refresher before we jump into this lesson. Then I'm going to use our mentor text, The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, as a guide to helping them understand how to complete this graphic organizer and how to organize their thinking. Students are going to have their iPads or whiteboards with them, so they're also going to have some opportunity to practice as well. Following that, they are also going to have to write a short paragraph, but I want them to write it in a specific format. So I've printed out this little example that I've done. It's really just an image, so it's a little bit blurry because it's so big, but it works and students can see it and understand it. So I kind of explained to them exactly what I want them to notice, what I want them to be able to have as far as their header goes, so that way we're all formatting it the exact same way. So when I plan out these lessons, I try to be very strategic. I want to make sure that I'm giving them plenty of time to be able to practice so that I can give them their feedback right then and there. So when I'm teaching my lesson, I might do an example in the beginning, and then I'm going to have them attempt and try. So I'll post up a page, I'll review the page with them. Sometimes I even make copies of the pages to be able to hand out to the students, but then they're going to use their whiteboards or their iPads using like a whiteboard app to be able to write their thinking down. And then that way I can go around and give a little bit more guidance before I send them off to do something independently. Now I want to show you what I'm doing with 6th grade. So 6th grade is a little bit different because I want them to start working with groups a little bit more. So I've only printed out one of these so far, but I wanted to get this recorded before it was too late. So students are actually going to be placed into groups, and they are going to have the opportunity, once I've modeled this, because I'm going to model it on my iPad using the projector that we have up there. So I'm going to model this graphic organizer for them there. They are also going to have their whiteboards. They each have whiteboards inside of their desks. So you can see that here. So my 6th graders will all be seated out in their desks. It looks a little bit different. 5th graders will be seated over here. And it's just because of the learning style for each of those 2 classes is a little bit different in what their needs are. So I do try to tailor it just a little bit. So I'm going to model for them there. They're going to have practice seated out at their desks. And then once they're done, they're going to go into their groups and they have a story that they're going to look at to be able to try it on their own. But I'm going to have them work in groups and they're going to complete these graphic organizers, and then we're going to post them around the room to be able to share with each other. So I think it's going to be a little bit different of a look. Sometimes I do it independently. Other times I will have them work in groups. Other times I have them work with partners. It really just varies, and it depends on your class. It also depends on the skill that they're working on. So I think this is kind of a really good example of how just everything can just be a little bit different, and how I kind of tailor it between 2 very different classes. Now, this day is really important because we have to get a really good understanding of our reading skill, because later on we're going to be taking this reading skill and then applying it into our own writing, which application is a higher level of Bloom's taxonomy. So it's going to be more challenging for them. And so making sure that they understand this is critical. Now, there are days where sometimes it takes 1 day, sometimes it takes 2 days, sometimes it takes 3 days. I can really tailor that however I see fit. But what we've tried to do a lot with some of these lessons that we've created for the Bridging Literacy Method is we've tried to break them down into their simplest form. And we have them scaffolded in a way that it makes sense for students. So for example, my 5th graders, last week when we were doing our first lesson, they were looking at protagonist and antagonist. So here's the protagonist and antagonist that we were looking at. Now this right here is going to be my writing example because the students had to do it for writing. This is the reading example that we did together. And so we looked at the protagonist, we looked at the antagonist, and we came up with all of these different characteristics that made them this type of a person. So they've already had experience with it. We're just really looking at it from a very different lens or a different organizer. When we're thinking about characteristics and we're looking at those intrinsic and extrinsic characteristics, this is really to help them understand, like, what are those elements that make up the intrinsic or extrinsic characteristic. So we have what they feel, what they say, what they think, how they act. And then all of these elements is kind of what makes this character this person. And so now that we've done like a protagonist and antagonist, we're going to dig a little bit deeper and we're going to start planning out some of these items that really make them their own individual person. Because later, when we come to the next lesson, they're going to be doing this for their writing. So we always take this opportunity to look at what authors are doing, to look and see how it's happening within the text, making sure that we understand how it's happening within the text before we start to go up and apply it to our own writing. So it gives them a purpose, it gives them a reason for what they're doing, and the kids really do enjoy it. So I'm gonna go ahead and start finishing up and preparing for today, and then I will catch up with you guys a little bit later and let you know how our lessons went. It's the end of the day and both blocks were very, very busy, but also incredibly productive. So for my first block, which is 5th grade, we worked on an extrinsic and intrinsic characteristics for their graphic organizer. We started the lesson by having kids do a comparison between feelings versus traits. So we talked about each of them. We just had a conversation about that, and then students went and practiced. I think I gave them about 5-ish minutes to be able to finish all of this. When they were done, we came back and we talked about some that were really surprising, because I would go around and I would check each group and their work. And so students had a discussion of just some that were really surprising to them. So for example, one was compassionate. They thought compassionate was a feeling, or that shy was I think it was either a feeling. And so we had a conversation about, about how Some of those can be perceived originally as feelings, but in true reality, they're a character trait. And so we try to think of it as in like feelings go up and down and they're constantly changing, and that the traits are something that are always with us. It's kind of instilled in who we are. It can change, but it's something that changes over a longer period of time. So that's kind of how we observe that. So we did that, had that discussion, and then we talked about the boy who harnessed wind. And we said that he was determined. And one of the things that I did is I gave my students one of their think marks, which this is a product inside of my store. I gave them the think marks to kind of look over them. They read them silently to themselves. And then I had them think about which character trait was something that William possessed in The Boy Who Harnessed Wind. And so students got the opportunity to share. And then from there, we decided on doing determined. So then we started pulling out each of these different components that shows that he was determined through his acts, what he does, how he feels, how he thinks, and how he says what he says. So I showed them how to do these. And in the first two, I went on ahead and I wrote it for them. But once I started to get down here, I actually had the students tell me what words I should put. So they weren't necessarily coming up and sharing the pen with me, but they were telling me exactly what words were going to go where. So I would say, okay, so how do I start it? And then they would say, well, in the text, perfect. Now where do I go? William, awesome. Where do I go from here? And they would give me phrases and bits to be able to place into my sentences. So it was a really, really great one. They had to do a independent activity and they had to do it with a poem. So we took some time to read the poem together because it was a little bit challenging. I'll go over that with them tomorrow so that they feel confident in that. So that was 5th grade. I felt great about that lesson. Now let me show you what 6th grade did. So I started 6th grade's lesson just by going over the story itself, the good deed that they had the opportunity to read with their groups. Now they had self-selected groups for yesterday's activity. And so I can always do these a little bit different. I might have an activity, I might have like a quiz that they get to take, or we just kind of talk through it. Today we just talked through the story. Once we were done with that, we got to the part where we started to notice how the main character was changing in her character traits. So this is where we brought up the importance of looking at not exactly how like characters change, like how did they start and how did they end, but really looking at how the events are truly impacting the characters throughout the story, and how those events is what kind of sparks the change in that character. So we did this graphic organizer that you can see here, and we worked at it together. So students got to talk about, what are the character traits of Heather? How did the inciting incident, how did she react to the inciting incident? How did she react to the rising action, the climax, the falling action? And then this is ultimately what causes her to change from the beginning to the very end. So we didn't get to finish this piece here, but the students seemed to really understand it. Once we had the opportunity to go over the graphic organizer as an entire class, I told students that they were going to work in groups. But I also told them that I was going to be selecting their groups at random. So one of the easiest ways that I do this is I have created book puzzles. For my class, I have book puzzles that come in groups of 3 and then some that come in groups of 4. And literally all I did was I opened up a PowerPoint, I took the picture of a book, and then I cut them in very odd shapes. So what I did was I counted how many students I had and I chose the correct number, and I ended up putting them in groups of 4. I think there were like a couple of groups of 3, but that's not a big deal. And then I basically told them that this was going to be their partner. Once they had their partners, they went back and they started reading with that new group, the Juice Box Bully. And that's the text that they're going to work on this independently. Well, independently as in like their group work. And then I told them that they were each going to have an opportunity with an anchor chart version of the organizer to complete. But I said one of the tricky things is that I'm actually going to have them each share the pen. So my students all came to me and they got to pick out one of the Sharpie colored pens, and that was their team color. And they each started working on completing the graphic organizer together as an entire group. Now they still have a little bit of work to do. They're gonna have an opportunity to do that tomorrow morning. But they were engaged, they were having really great discussion, they were each sharing the pen to ensure that everyone had an opportunity to kind of add to the anchor chart overall. We're gonna end up posting these around so that students can do a quick gallery walk and a little share just about the character change from that specific story itself, and they'll submit this as like an image within Schoology. So overall, very, very busy day, but it was a great day. So I'm gonna go ahead and end this here, and then I will see you guys in the morning with the next day's lesson. Depending on how well your students grasp the content from the second part of your lesson, and that's gonna be the reading skill, you're then going to start to take that into writing. So today's kind of a relatively like simple prep day because the only things that I really need are gonna be graphic organizers. So once again, I went on ahead and printed out my graphic organizer for my 5th grade group. So we were doing extrinsic and intrinsic. And today I'm going to be focusing on talking about my main character. So this is going to be my protagonist, and really dissecting what this person is supposed to look like in my story itself. So let me just kind of give you guys a frame of reference. So last week when we first started brainstorming, we came up with Fractured Fairy Tales. And we were reading Hansel and Gretel was one of our mentor texts. And so we were thinking about what are some other fairy tales that we might know about. And this is a really great way for them to kind of have a spin-off of, you know, taking a story, but then kind of creating it to be their own. So for those students who have really struggled when it comes to coming up with an idea, creative narratives can be very challenging in a sense that some kids can have very little information and it kind of ends abruptly, or you have kids who kind of take it and then it's like the and then, and you want to teach them how to have a well-formatted story overall. So what we do in 5th grade is talk about Fractured Fairy Tales because this is the perfect way for them to kind of take ideas from other authors and start to kind of twist them and make them their own. So we came up with a bunch of different fairy tales together and I kind of wrote them out. Now you're gonna see a part here where it's in purple. And that's mainly because they were talking about Alice in Wonderland, and I talked to them about how, oh, Alice in Wonderland went to this like different world. How does she do that? Well, she fell down the hole. Okay, perfect. There are other stories that are out there that take the main character to a different world that they have to experience. And so we started coming up with some other ones that are not necessarily like fairy tales, but it still kind of fits in that box of going to a different world itself. So we have the Polar Express, and we talk about how the train itself then transports the character to the North Pole. We had Jumanji because the board game then brings the world to the real life. And then you had Narnia because they go through the wardrobe to be able to get there. So it helped to kind of spark students' ideas and interest in different stories. And I tried to come up with a bunch of different types. So you can see here, like we have Little Red Riding Hood, Aladdin, Snow White, Peter Pan, the Three Little Pigs, to hopefully get an interest with all of my students. Once we did this, then I'm gonna switch some organizers around. We took what we learned last week, which was protagonist and antagonist, but we took that idea and I modeled for them how I was gonna take a story and then create it to be my own, and how I was gonna twist little things here and there. And so I ended up doing Jack and the Beanstalk, but instead of just it being Jack, I wanted it to be a boy and a girl, like a brother and a sister. And then instead of a beanstalk, I wanted it to be a tree. And instead of a giant, I wanted it to be a dragon, because these are all elements that I really like, okay? So we came up with the problem and the solution first. That's important. Come up with the problem and the solution first. So they knew what the problem was going to be. I kind of talked it out with them. We talked about what the solution was going to be. So I have a very clear ending. I know where I'm starting and then I know where I'm going. And then we started to develop characteristics that made them a protagonist and characteristics that make them an antagonist. And so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the boy and the girl and we're gonna start to look at how I can think of things that they're gonna say, things that they're going to think, do, feel, in order to ensure that these characteristics are seen within my story itself. So we're gonna do more brainstorming today, and I'm gonna take that graphic organizer and just put it here and talk them through those elements. Once I do that, then students are gonna have the opportunity to practice with their own characters. I will be walking around, checking in with them, and once I feel as though they have a very good idea and understanding of where their story is headed, because they also did another brainstorm on top of that of just like the story plot line, then I'm gonna send them off and they're going to start to write. Now, I don't have my students write inside of their writer's notebooks. In fact, I have them do it within Google Docs, because we have iPads, we do pretty much everything on there, and it's really nice because I can be at home and I can open it up and see their work. Because I just kind of attach it as like a Google Doc within my Schoology LMS. But one of the things that I do end up trying to teach them is I trying to teach them formatting. So we talk about formatting. What is that going to look like so that they can ensure that it looks appropriate? Because if not, I'm going to receive so many different papers and they're all going to look dramatically different. So we go over formatting. Students will format today and then they will start working on their rough drafts. Now my 6th graders are just a little bit different because 3rd grade, this would be their 3rd brainstorm for their writing. 6th grade, this is going to be the 2nd. But what's really nice about this one is that it's going to take them through plot. So I'm going to have a conversation with them today about how we can build the plot within our writing. And I don't necessarily want to hold them to only having, they have to have 4 or 5 paragraphs. I want to talk to them about including all of the elements. If they include all the elements, they should have 5 to 6 paragraphs by the end of it. So we're going to have a conversation about that, and they're going to work on completing this writing as well. Now, if you're wondering, Bridget, do you do 2 different writings? Sometimes. I'm not doing it this time. I'm going to use the exact same story, but it's going to look a little bit different for both classes because there's different expectations. So, same story. I just couldn't be bothered to come up with a second one, but it's going to work, and I think they're going to really enjoy this moment today. We also do have to finish that other piece today, so at some point this morning, my students are going to have an opportunity to work on that, so that way we don't get behind, because we just gotta stay on schedule. So that is it this morning. That's kind of my prep. Like I said, it's a very easy prep day. I just have to have my story in the back of my brain as I'm doing this. And then once I do this, I'm gonna have to truly write out my story so that they can see what a really good example is supposed to look like. But I will leave you guys here, and then I'm gonna catch up with you later on to talk to you on how the day went. It is officially the end of the day, and my students worked really, really hard. We did some review from yesterday's lesson that was taking us a little bit longer to get through, and then we did our lesson for today. So let me show you a little bit about what that looked like. So one of the things that we talked about is basically that we had a poem that students had to work on independently, and they were pulling out the extrinsic and intrinsic characteristics of Father William. So students were having a little bit of a challenging time understanding the text itself. So we read this text together and we really kind of dissected it. I also enjoy really acting out some of these moments. Now, obviously, I wasn't doing something like a back somersault. I wasn't standing on my head, but they still had fun with it nonetheless. And I think it really helped them to be able to understand the story overall. One of the things that I really strive to do within Bridging Literacy is incorporating a variety of texts. So I might do a short story, I might do a picture book, I might do a chapter from a chapter book or a couple of chapters, or poetry, but I want them looking and really working and analyzing that specific skill amongst a variety of resources. So the poem was something that we reviewed together, and then students had about 15 to 20-ish minutes to finish up the assignment that they were working on. And they did a really good job. I think I only ended up having about 2 or 3 who needed a little more extra time, and that was given to them at a separate block during the day. From there, then I wanted to have a mini lesson. Once my students kind of got that work done, we came back together. We had a mini lesson and we started talking about how we can really analyze our characters to help us develop them within our own writings. So we took the exact same graphic organizer, which that's kind of a reoccurring theme within Bridging Literacy, is that you want to take the same organizers that you analyze reading with and then use them to apply writing. And my students then started kind of taking their ideas for their own stories and pulling out their protagonists. I only wanted them to focus on protagonists. Various years I've had them do one on their protagonist and one on their antagonist, but for this cruise specifically, I wanted them to just focus on developing one really good character. So that's where the protagonist comes into play, and that's something that we talked about last week. So I kind of told them the story first because it's really, really important for students to have that oral development of a specific story. So they need to be able to say it. If they can't tell you the story, they're never going to be able to write the story. So they need practice orally and just having a conversation about what's happening in their text, like in the story that they're going to write overall. So once I told my story to them, which they were all excited about, and I think I did a great job doing that, then I kind of modeled for them what that looked like. So I came up with their extrinsic characteristics. I also, we came up together after I told my story. We came up together with some of their character traits on the sticky note, and then we started to write down different things that they act, think, feel, or say within that story that I just told them. And because students had just heard it, they were then able to kind of share some of their thinking. So a lot of what you're going to see here is what my students were telling me they heard while I was telling them that story. So it was a great conversation, and I think they really understood it. So now they've taken this, they're applying it to their protagonist, and then once I've talked to them, I've kind of given them my feedback in their stories, they're going to start writing. We did not get to that today. It was going to be a goal of mine, but it was just something that's just going to have to wait until tomorrow, which is completely fine. So that is what it looks like for 5th grade. And now let's look at what 6th grade did. So all of my 6th grade students were able to finish up their graphic organizers within their books. And this was for the reading The Juice Box Bully. Once they were done with that, we had a conversation about the story overall. We talked about the story, the events that were occurring, and we also talked about how the character, in this case Pete, was responding to the various events that were occurring in the story. Once we were finished with that, we talked about how this can really help you define just the event in the story and how it's going to flow overall. So my students had an opportunity to watch me model. Again, I articulated my story to them because the more that they hear it, the more that they practice saying it, the easier it's going to be for them to write. So I told them my story, and then we worked to fill out the graphic organizer together. So this is what the graphic organizer ended up looking like. We started talking about the boy. This one's a little bit different from 5th grade. It's not vastly different, but it is still a little bit different because this character is going to change. So I don't have a boy and a girl in this story. And then we had the inciting incident, which I labeled here, along with how he responds to it, what happens with the rising action climax, how he begins to change, and what are those final characteristic traits. So students had an opportunity to finish working on this piece. From there, I started giving feedback to my students within Schoology so they can start making some of those adjustments. But starting tomorrow, they're going to have opportunity to start writing their rough drafts. So tomorrow's going to be all about grammar. So we're going to have some grammar practice, and then students are going to begin working on their rough drafts for their stories while I continue to confer and provide feedback on what we did today and also yesterday. So that is what today looked like. I will check back in with you guys in the morning and share with you what the prep looks like for grammar. Today is the 4th part of this lesson, and it's all about grammar and word study. So just to recap from this week, we have a unit that we're looking at within Bridging Literacy, and the Bridging Literacy method has 6 different units, which each focus on a specific form of writing. Within each of those units, we focus on 4 different reading skills or strategies, and each of those 4 reading skills or strategies has 5 parts to that lesson. So in the first part, which we did on Monday, was engaging with a mentor text, asking and answering questions, and also working with vocabulary. Then we looked at the reading skill or strategy on the second day. On the third day, we talked all about author's craft, and today is grammar and word study. So for this, what we typically will do is we will have a mentor sentence. Now, it just so happens that with this lesson, it is a little bit different, but I am going to show you because we're going to do some practice with my 5th grade group when it comes to a mentor sentence because they need the practice with it. So we have a mentor sentence that I will end up posting in the front of my classroom. So I'm going to show it to you in just a little bit so you can get an idea. And I will have my students look at it. So I'm going to flip you around so you can see exactly how I kind of prepare and set up for my grammar sentence, my mentor sentence. Okay, so I'm gonna hope that this is a little bit easier for you to see. But we have our mentor sentence that I've picked out from the text, The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. Again, everything is kind of revolved around this text itself. So we have the mentor sentence that I've picked out. I'm gonna show this to my kids by projecting it up here. So let me show you what that looks like because I have it attached to my Apple TV. Once I screen share, you're going to see it posts right up there. So this is what the students will see. Sometimes I'll make it a little bit bigger so that they can see it a little bit better here. But that is what they're going to end up seeing as they're all seated out on their desks. Okay, so once we have that mentor sentence, students are going to look for multiple things. One, they're going to find things that they notice. So they're going to look for punctuation. They're going to look for capital letters. They're going to look for the type of sentence. We're going to talk about that. We will also look for different word study that we are kind of looking for. So we'll talk a little bit about kind of the GR. We'll talk about the A sounds. We'll talk about how, the word follow, we have the double L there. So we'll pick up things that we may want to have a conversation about, and we'll just kind of list those on there. The next thing that they're really going to kind of focus on, or the focus of this mentor text, is going to be the punctuation for what it looks like when you're incorporating dialogue. So this is all about dialogue. And so we will edit this together, and then I'm going to give my students some practice because, again, that's the focus. I want them to focus on dialogue, but we have a lot of conversations about this sentence overall. So what I did is I'm using this app called Explain Everything. This is the one that I've always used. I'm going to show you what the little icon looks like. That's what it looks like. It is a paid app. However, it's phenomenal. So once I have this posted up like this, I can go ahead and add slides. So you're going to see I've added some already where they are just blank sentences. And the students will use the whiteboards that are in their desks to copy the sentence down, but then add the punctuation. So it's a way for them to be able to practice. What's really nice about that is that students will then hold their whiteboards up, and then I will be able to give them immediate feedback at that moment. So we're gonna do some quick practice together, and then I'm gonna have them come back to me in my little area, and we're gonna talk about the next piece because they need that practice there. So today's kind of like a double lesson for them because they needed some extra reinforcement along with what our focus really is for today, which is still dialogue, but it's another piece of dialogue. So let me show you what that looks like. One of the big challenges in upper grades is getting students to use the correct amount of dialogue. You will have students who use very little, or you have students who use so much dialogue that you feel like you're reading a graphic novel. So what I did is I wrote out The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. I just copied every single word onto a Google Doc. So that way I could have it printed like this. And I'm going to end up pasting this together, and you guys will end up seeing this afterwards, but we're going to go through and highlight the dialogue. And then the whole point is then to have a conversation about how much dialogue is actually being used, what's happening between the dialogue, and getting students to really think about how they're going to be using dialogue within their own stories. So students are then going to have a discussion post that they're going to complete, and today is all about starting their draft. So now that they have a really good understanding of how to punctuate dialogue, we've really looked at our characters, they've planned everything out, they're ready to start writing. So they're going to use all of their organizers to help kind of plan out everything as they are kind of going through and writing their first rough draft. So that's going to be the focus of today. Sixth grade is pretty much the same way, except we're doing it with the Good Deed. And since the Good Deed was already digital for us, we're just gonna have them do it independently, and then I'm gonna have them complete the discussion post and then also start working on their rough drafts. What's nice about sixth grade is that I had them last year, and I know that that group is really strong when it comes to incorporating dialogue into their stories. I have about a handful of students that I'm gonna pull back and do it as a small group while everybody else is working independently. So I'm changing it up based on the needs of my students and specifically what I want them to be able to focus on and be able to get done. So that's what it looks like for today. Again, all about word study and grammar, and incorporating some of that dialogue and then getting our writing started, which is very, very exciting because these kids have been so excited about getting started with their creative narratives. I will check in with you guys later on this afternoon to show you what all of this looks like after I've taught the lesson. End of the day, and I wanted to go over how the lessons went so that you guys could get a better picture of today in general. So I'm gonna show you the way that we do our mentor sentences. Just kind of keep in mind that when I do this, again, I have it projected up in the front. Students are at their desk, they have whiteboards and dry erase markers, and so they're expected to copy down the sentence and begin looking at the things that they notice. So let me show you some of the things that my students observed today. So here's what my iPad looks at the end of us going through our mentor sentence. So students are looking for the parts of speech. We took note that there were quotations marks and that this means that that this is dialogue, that when someone is talking, we noticed the dialogue tag, the comma, and we also talked about the type of sentence that it is. Some of the things that I do just to kind of encourage more discussion around this is sometimes we'll break up the sentence ourselves. So in this case today, what we did is we took our declarative sentence and we decided to make them into an imperative, an interrogative, and then an exclamatory sentence. So my students were able to kind of write their own, they shared theirs, and then I wrote some examples here. So you can see how we changed what was happening here and we changed it into a different type of sentence. This also kind of leads us to talk about subject and predicate, making sure that we have our verbs and everything that's in there. Something else that we noticed were going to be the commas and how the commas were always in close relation to the dialogue tag that we observed in that sentence. We also talk a little bit about word study. So in this case, we talked about the blends here. So we have grab, and then we came up with some different ones that we knew of as far as the blends go. And then here we talked about the double L and other words that we knew with the double L that kind of followed this same pattern. But then we talked about how this OW says the long O sound. But then we understood that there are OU and OWs that make the owl sound. So cloud, down, and we started creating some words and brainstorming some that went with that spelling pattern itself. So we talked about all of that. Students got their practice. So I was giving them some different words and then, sentences. They would write down the sentence and then they would add the punctuation marks that went along with it. So that's the practice that we ended up doing for our mentor sentence. Then we came around and we started talking about the difference in dialogue, like analyzing the dialogue within a text. And so they had their own version on their iPads, and then I had this version. We read through it together. We kind of took note that there were some italics that were happening here that gave us an idea that the character was thinking. And then we also started looking for when people were talking. So as I was reading and we came to dialogue, students would kind of say dialogue, and then we would stop and talk about, well, who is it that's speaking? How do we know this? And then we would kind of insert the dialogue tag that went along with it. You'll see here that they started in orange and then we started changing because this is all the same person that's speaking. And then here we have a new character, and this followed onto the exact same, on the page here. So you'll see that other people started coming out and speaking as well. And so we wanted to note the differences in the characters that were talking. When we were done, we had a conversation just about, what does this mean? How much dialogue are we inserting in there? What's the difference between how much our characters is talking? In this case, he does a lot of thinking in the story itself too. So we tried to make note of that. And this would help to encourage them that as they go in their writing for their rough drafts, they can incorporate a little more of what they see in this author. Another thing that we practiced with, this class was very busy. We practiced a little bit with our dialogue tags again, and I kind of changed around where things were. So if I said, "Come here, please," said the teacher, and then I would change it to the teacher said, "Come here, please." And then it said, "Sally," said the teacher, "Come here, please," so that they can take note and have that practice as well before they started in their rough drafts. So they did a ton of work. From there, we ended up going through and we added our header in, and then students were able to start their rough drafts. So I'm hoping that they can get a good chunk of it done today during a different block that we have in our day. And then tomorrow they'll have a little bit more opportunity to be able to finish that up. So that's what 5th grade did. 6th grade looked just a little bit different, and it's mainly because I had them last year and I know their ability level, and so I wanted to be able to accommodate for that. And so for them, they went through this activity by themselves. So they did a dialogue kind of reflection, and they did this independently because I wanted to hear their thoughts on it. So they had the story, The Good Deed, which is what they took on their iPads. They gave them a fresh one. So they took a fresh story over, and then I wanted them to highlight. So basically what they did is I kind of created this last minute because I had the idea to create it last minute. So let me show you what this looks like. So I really wanted them to reflect on it, but I wanted to take them through the process, but independently at the same time. So we did a dialogue reflection. It gave them the directions here, and then it asked them a few questions that I wanted them to kind of prompt some of that thinking. And then I had them go back, and it says here, now go back, and I use different colors for different characters. And then it asked them a few more questions in response to the changes that they made within that story. So when they were done, they had a better idea of what dialogue should look like within their text, and then they were to start their rough drafts. The big difference with that crew too is that I don't start their rough drafts with them anymore. I expect for them to have their headers, have their formatting correct, because when I get to the middle school, I want that to already be ingrained in their head so they know exactly what they need to be putting where. So I don't even tell them the name of the assignment. They should know the name of the assignment by looking within Schoology. So that way they're prepared when they leave me and they're successful in the middle school. So that was basically it. It was a jam-packed day for 5th grade. Bless them, they worked really, really hard, and I'm so very proud of them, and they did a fantastic job. So I will catch up with you guys in the morning and show you what the final day looks like within the Bridging Literacy Method. It's the end of the week, which means that it's also the end of this lesson. So today is the final day for lesson 2 within our second unit, which is the creative narrative unit. Keep in mind that there are 4 total lessons within each unit. So each lesson essentially takes about 5 days, maybe a little bit more if you have to kind of take it a little bit slower, scaffold the process a little bit more for your students, but it takes around 5 days. So on this day, the 5th day of a lesson, we really want to encourage students to reflect on their learning, reflect on how they've grown as a reader and as a writer during the lesson. What are some of the skills and strategies that they've been able to acquire during this process? And just think about the overall process from the entire lesson itself. So today is a reflection day. And so with the reflection day, as a teacher, I'm not going to do a ton of instruction. I'm going to help guide students in their reflection process, but I'm not necessarily going to help them write everything. So this is a great opportunity for me to be able to individual conference, to pull kids, to go over lessons again if I need to go over lessons. So I really like these days because we kind of ended a little bit slower, and it just makes for a great way to end the week. So let me show you the prep that we have for today. So first I want to show you my Schoology page. Students are going to reflect using a discussion board within Schoology. So this is what it looks like. You can see that it has Unit 2, Lesson 2.5, Reflection, and then it has the question It has the question that students are going to be answering. Now, I will be honest, reflecting is a very difficult process for a lot of students. So in the beginning, as we're starting to learn how to reflect, I like to help break this down for them. And so this is how I do it. This is probably not the prettiest thing that you've ever seen, but normally I write it on my whiteboard. I just don't have a ton of whiteboard space. So I created one of these for each of my units. I could have, let me show you this. Within each Bridging Literacy unit plan, I could have just printed this out and used this like as a brainstorming page. I just didn't want to go through the process of just printing it out. So I basically took 4 sheets of paper and then I glued them together. And then I wrote, the unit number, the lesson, reflect, and then I wrote the question here. So we have the question for each of the classes. And then down here, we're going to create bullets. We're going to look for identifying words for what we need to be doing within our reflection process. What are the questions that we're going to be answering? And then we're going to come up with bullets together as a class for how we can possibly answer those questions together. So they're going to have a really good brainstorm list by the beginning of class so that when they go and sit down and they start writing, they have something that they can refer to. So we break this down quite a bit and you'll see that process at the very end of the day. So other than that, basically what I've done is I've also gone through and looked at my students and where they are as far as their understanding with some of the concepts that we've taught this week. So if I need to reteach a vocabulary lesson, I can do that. If I need to go through and look at an independent lesson with a group of kids, I can pull those students, go over that story with them, and then give them the opportunity to resubmit. I wholeheartedly believe in resubmitting because they're learning. So the assessment is going to be the thing that allows me to be able to see where they are, but this is the learning process. So they have an opportunity to resubmit their organizers or their thinking process by the end of this week. So that is kind of what it looks like for this morning. I will catch you guys a little bit later on this afternoon to show you what our thinking looks like. It's the end of the day and I wanted to show you guys the work that my students did when we were discussing their reflection post for their last part of their lesson. So let me flip you guys around and show you the great work that they did. So here you can see the 2 pages. Again, normally I would put this up on my whiteboard, but I decided to do it this way this time. That way I can keep it posted and also have my music that I put around the background as well. So here, this was going to be my 6th graders. And what we really did is first we went through it and we read and we started to kind of come up with what do some of these words mean. So for instance, analyzing, they said looking closely, they said all the parts. For the reactions, they said what they say, do, think, or feel. And then we talked about events as well, because that's what we're really looking at. They also wanted to say that it had something to do with character change and then also as a reader and writer. So we pulled some of those apart and then I had them brainstorm and try to answer. And what I did is I kind of chunked it for them. So I would ask them questions that would help inspire some of these responses. So here are the responses. Words are a struggle, but here are the responses that my students gave me. And for this class, because they are very used to this format at this point, I don't have to break it down as much as I do for 5th grade. So let me show you what 5th grade looks like. And basically what they would do with this is they would take this, they would go to their writing, find evidence to help them support any of these things as they would start to kind of build their response at the end. For 5th grade, we did the exact same thing. So we pulled things apart. That's supposed to be an R, but it looks like an N. We said that this was talking and that it would help you understand, the personality overall. But for this crew, what I ended up doing is I took these big questions here and we broke it down into 3 questions. So here's 1, here's 2, and here's 3. So here are the 3 questions we came up with. How does dialogue help you as a reader? How did looking at dialogue help you as a writer? And then how does dialogue help you understand their personality or the character's personality? So once we had those broken down, then we had the students go through and we kind of talked about it. So here are some of the things that they ended up kind of discussing with me. And then they were then able to take it and go back to their writing. But some of my students used these numbers to kind of separate it, and that's fine. I think it's a stepping stone. We're scaffolding it, so hopefully we can take it from this point to this point and they can just create one big response. So I know it's overwhelming, and my whole job here is to really scaffold this process for them overall. So that is it, guys. Those are going to be my basic lessons for a week within Bridging Literacy. I hope that this helped to really give you a better idea of what my lessons look like in upper elementary using the Bridging Literacy method and using the units that I've created. If you're interested in learning more about these units, you can head over to my description box, and I have a link down there for you to grab the cheat sheet. And within this cheat sheet, you'll get all the information for all of the different units that I have planned out, along with the reading standards that go along with it. So if that is something that you are excited about or want to learn more about, definitely go and check that out. I also wanted to let you guys know that my Bridging Literacy community is going to be opening up at the end of this year. So if this is something that you're interested in, I provide more support, more materials to really help you along this process in really creating an authentic and realistic for you and for your students ELA block, one that allows them to make connections, one that allows for you to be able to confer with students, and for everything to just kind of be like a nice, easy, smooth surface. That's kind of the goal here. So if you're interested in that, I'm gonna leave a link down in the description box. It's a waiting list right now, but as soon as the community is opened up, you will have access and you'll receive an email first, and that way you can go ahead and start signing up for that. If you guys have any questions, leave them down in the comment box. I'm very curious what you think of this entire process. Thank you so much for joining me on this video. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up, like it, subscribe, and I will catch you all next time. Bye.